Hello. Start in America. Is JP Morgan getting a good return on $4.6 million of gift to the New York City police? Like perhaps special protection from Occupy Wall Street? No matter how you look at this development, it does not smell right. Strange little way of starting there. Analogy mixing. JP Morgan Chase recently donated an unprecedented $4.6 million to the New York City Police Foundation. The gift was the largest in the history of the foundation and will enable the New York City Police Department to strengthen security in the Big Apple. The money will pay for 1,000 new patrol car laptops, as well as security monitoring software in the New York PD's main data center, etc. It opens up strange questions, though, does it not? I'll just throw one question in, although I know there are many. And this is a bit of a round-the-back question. It's JP Morgan gives the New York City Police Department $4.6 million. My little question is, whose money was that $4.6 million? Now, the answer is seemingly obvious, but it just sets the brain thinking a little, I would hope. JP Morgan gives the present, but who is JP Morgan to give that money, and whose is that money belonging to? It just shows the oddness of business. Anyway, moving on to the big theme. Project Syndicate and Brad DeLong article, A Free Lunch for America. And maybe that should be a free lunch for America ? But Brad don't think it's question. Berkeley. Former US Treasury Secretary Lawrence Summers. Now, Larry is to be thrashed roundly on most all occasions, but you've got to listen to him. He's not always stupid. Had a good line at the IMF meeting this year. Governments, he said, are trying to treat a broken ankle when the patient is facing organ failure. Summers was criticising Europe's focus on the second-order issue of Greece, while far graver imbalances between the EU's north and south and between reckless banks, creditors and governments that fail to regulate properly worsen with each passing day. Now, for us, the big take from that paragraph is Europe's focus on second-order issues like Greece when far graver imbalances between the EU's north and south exist. But on the other side of the Atlantic, Americans have no reason to feel smug. Summers could have used the same metaphor to criticize the United States, where the continued focus on the long-run funding dilemmas of social insurance is sucking all the oxygen out of the efforts to deal with America's macroeconomic and unemployment crisis. In other words, all this talk about getting the budget balanced and all that sort of thing is taking the eye off the ball of what's actually going on now. And I've just carved into later in the article, the US government can currently borrow for 30 years at a real, inflation-adjusted, interest rate of 1% per year. Suppose that the US government were to borrow an extra $500 billion over the next 2 years and spend it on infrastructure, for example, and even unproductively on projects for which the social rate of return is a measly 25%. Suppose that, as seems to be the case, the simple Keynesian government expenditure multiplier on this spending is only 2. Well, we won't go into that, but might be even lucky to get 2 out of it, but let it roll. In that case, the $500 billion of extra federal infrastructure spending over the next 2 years would produce $1 trillion of extra output of goods and services, generate approximately 7 million persons years of extra employment, and push down the unemployment rate by 2 percentage points in each of those years, and with tighter labour force attachment on the part of those who have jobs, the unemployment rate thereafter would likely be about 0.1% lower in the indefinite future. In other words, you get the gains now and you'll hold on to them. all for $500 billion. He finishes the article with, but there are two things different about today. First, the US labour market is failing so badly that expanded government spending carries no resource cost to society as a whole. Second, bond investors are being really stupid. In a world in which the S&P 500 has a 7% annual earnings yield, nobody should be happy holding a US government 30-year inflation-adjusted bond that yields 1% a year. That 6 percentage point difference in anticipated yield is a measure of bond investors' extraordinary and irrational panic. They are willing to pay 6% per year for safety. Right now, however, the US government can manufacture safety out of thin air merely by printing bonds. The government, too, would then win by pocketing that 6% per year of value. Though 30 years from now, bondholders who feel like winners now would most likely look at their portfolio's extraordinarily poor performance over 2011, 2041 and rue their strategy. In other words, if the general public want to overdo it on safety, the government can profit from it. Right, moving on. China Economic Watch. Joe Gagnon. The internal cost of China's currency policy. It is currently costing the Chinese central bank about $240 billion a year to hold down the value of the Chinese currency relative to other currencies. And this cost is growing rapidly. The cost would decrease significantly if China allowed its currency to float and began reducing its foreign reserves, although there would likely be a one-time capital loss at the time the currency begins to float. Yeah. To put this cost in perspective, $250 billion is considerably larger than the China's trade surplus of $183 billion. You know, you imagine China's trade surplus is huge, but their costs of just maintaining the cheapness of their goods is even more. It is about 4% of China's GDP. Moreover, this cost does not include the implicit tax on the banking system associated with China's reserve holdings, which is passed on to the Chinese householders in the form of depressed rates and interest on savings deposits. Poor Chinese hard-working people get almost less than we do now in the West. Although they've got, huge amounts of money, but it's taken straight out of the country, so as not to cause inflation and to keep the exchange rate down. As of June 2011, China's foreign exchange reserves were $3.2 trillion, having grown rapidly from $2.9 trillion only December 2010. There are two components to the cost of these reserves. First, the interest rate earned on these reserves is below the rate of interest paid to finance them. Second, the value of these reserves in terms of Chinese yuan is declining and is expected to continue to decline. So what we have is another party that is willing to lose. So with that party willing to lose, there is a party that's willing to gain, and in this case it could still be the United States government, who can afford to spend the extra money to get their unemployment rate down. Right, this is Cicchetti. He's World Bank of International Settlements. Which one is he? World Bank of International Settlements. Top economist and whiz kid. Global current account balances. Now, this is the PDF. I watched the video at the weekend, and it's very dry, but it's hugely important. These are these world capital flows and trade flows, net and gross flows. And if you really want to grok the whole world situation, unfortunately, you've got to understand this. So what we have here is, as he described it in the video, a python, a snake, he's eaten a couple of rats. You can see the one towards the left in the 80s was a smaller bump than the more modern one in the noughties, 2000s. That bump in the 80s caused the Louvre and Plaza Accords, which, what can I say, came to an agreement of what to do with the imbalances. But the 2000s one has created even bigger imbalances, much bigger imbalances, but there has been no accord. There's just tension, and I'll leave it there. And go on to the Telegraph and Ambrose Evans Pritchard. It's who I think, I don't know if it's adrenaline or you just get a moral high from being right, but has really been putting up really very, very good articles in the last couple of weeks. And this one is a slight departure, but a very important departure, and I think a very important article for the Telegraph. Protectionism beckons as leaders push world into depression. The world savings rate has surpassed its modern era high of 24%. This is the killer in the global system. It is why we are at imminent risk of tipping into a second, deeper leg of intractable depression. Now, it is really a must-read article. It's a shame there are typos in it, but that can't be helped, apparently, in the Telegraph. And I'll just pull out these 4 paragraphs. Mr. Dumas said China's grotesque and destructive policies of overinvestment, 50% of GDP, and underconsumption, 36% of GDP. You know, we talk about the West and our consumption of about 70% of GDP. China's half, 36%, are unprecedented in history, but at least China's currency advantage is being eroded by wage inflation. His full wrath is reserved for the fallacious and malignant policies of Angela Merkel and Wolfgang Schäuble in Germany. They are enforcing a gold standard outcome on the whole Eurozone, suffused with self-righteousness. They insist that the imbalances must be put right only by deficit country deflation. This is what this whole imbalance thing is. You get one part of it is balanced out by another part of it, and there's no rightness and wrongness because you happen to be on one half of the coin, as it were. It's all the one coin, and it needs sorting out. A new Plaza or Louvre Accord, or these tensions will persist. And in the Eurozone, because the Germany is the dominant partner, and they just happen to be on one side of the coin, they are saying that our side of the coin is right and the people on the other side of the coin are wrong, which isn't right. The sheer scale of global imbalances is made clear in a paper by Stephen Cicchetti at the Bank of International Settlements, and that's the one I was reading and found the video for, which made it easier at the weekend. His paper contains a chart showing that combined surplus deficits reached 6% of world GDP in the boom, far beyond the extremes that led to the US losing patience in 1985 and imposing the Plaza Accord. The gap narrowed post-Lehman, but is widening again. So that links back to Cicchetti. And it really is very, very important. I think I said that. Right. I've had this link up for, I don't know, in my tabs for about 2 weeks, maybe 10 days, but I knew if I started on just this one little graph, chart, bit of information, data, I wouldn't stop. But I know now that for today I've done so much I can't blither on about it. But what you've got, the current accounts balance on the right and the fiscal balance on the left, and you get the side of the coin, Portugal, Greece and Spain on one side of the coin with their current account balance in the red, minuses, Luxembourg, Finland, Netherlands and Germany positive. They're exporters and they import, the Portugal, Greece import. But all of these things need balancing out, their accounts, and they need balancing out on the account schedule. Everything has to balance in the end. You know, it's a world and it's very complicated to make everything balance, but it all will. For the fiscal balances, this is the government deficits and whatever in Greece and Portugal to balance out the fact that money was going out because they were importing in. Their government imported in borrowings to balance out, and then the extra balance would have been borrowed in by the people of Portugal and Greece and, let's say, Spain, to make the balances balance, because they always do. And down at the bottom, you get only Finland and Luxembourg with positive fiscal balances. Okay. That's just to say you've got that smaller world, the Eurozone world, in the macro actual world, but it's all to do with balances of accounts. And the Eurozone is more constricted due to its not inflexible exchange rates in the Eurozone, but the set exchange rates, which don't leave any room for manoeuvre. So they have to concentrate even more on these imbalances and get them balanced up without having recourse to exchange rates or even interest rates. Now, this is what I'm going to finish with because I didn't want to let it go by. This is Holland and its PMI. I just dragged it off this morning because I think it's fresh off the press this morning, and you can see it going down below the 50 line, and we all know what that is. Operating conditions in Dutch manufacturing sector deteriorated during September for the first time since July 2009. And I was just thinking yesterday that if there was a good out of the money big betting short, as in if you wanted to bet something that's unlikely to happen might happen, so you can make lots of money, bet against Holland, bet against the Netherlands, because they are put up with Germany as the good solid core of Europe. But Germany's only the good solid core of Europe because it's big. Holland isn't as big, it's much more bite-sized. The market could get its teeth into Holland. The people are very indebted. They do the same system as Germany, this export-led system. The exporters, if it turns into a global depression, are going to get slaughtered. It's always the exporters, the manufacturers, that really take it in the pants when there's a global depression. It's not the borrowers and the borrow to buy the stuff. It's the makers of the stuff that really get it, because they're all geared up just to keep that going, the exporting. They really will take it hard. And the worst thing about Holland is the size of its banking sector in comparison to the size of the country. If things go horrendously wrong, the government won't have enough money to back the banking sector, and the population is grossly over indebted now anyway. And if the exporting model breaks down, the Netherlands will be in dreadful trouble. And as I say, they're a bite-size possibility for markets to get their teeth into, as opposed to Germany being too big. So it's highly unlikely, and I wouldn't know if it's even possible to do a bet on Holland blowing up. But, but it'd be like a horse race, 66 or 100 to 1, because it's very unlikely, because it's a brilliant country. But it's brilliant when things are going well. If things turn bad, Holland would be a good outside bet for something very unlikely happening. And I wouldn't like to happen to them, because I like them. But still, that's the way things are. Balances, and imbalances. Enough. Bye.